The G7 leaders delivered a powerful message to Russia by extending an invitation to Volodymyr Zelensky in Hiroshima. However, their attention was also focused on China, whom British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak deemed the greatest challenge of our age, with regards to global security and prosperity. Sunak further emphasized that China's domestic and international conduct was becoming increasingly authoritarian. In two separate statements, the leaders of the world's wealthiest democracies conveyed their stance on contentious issues such as the Indo-Pacific and Taiwan, firmly addressing China. Nevertheless, the most significant aspect of their message centered around what they referred to as economic coercion. The G7 finds itself in a delicate balancing act. While their economies have become interdependent with China through trade, competition with Beijing has intensified, and they have divergent views on numerous issues, including human rights. Presently, they fear being held hostage. Dear viewers, Slant News TV is currently engaged in an ardent pursuit of achieving its inaugural milestone of 1,000 subscribers. We earnestly implore your wholehearted support by subscribing to our channel. Beijing has shown no hesitation in imposing trade sanctions on countries that displease them. Instances include South Korea when Seoul installed a US missile defense system and Australia during a period of strained relations. The European Union was particularly alarmed when China obstructed Lithuanian exports after the Baltic country allowed Taiwan to establish a de facto embassy there. Consequently, it is unsurprising that the G7 would condemn what they perceive as a disturbing rise in the weaponization of economic vulnerabilities. This form of coercion, according to them, seeks to undermine the foreign and domestic policies of G7 members and partners worldwide. The G7 called for a policy of de-risking, which European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, in attendance at the summit, has advocated for. This approach represents a more moderate version of the US concept of decoupling from China, entailing adopting a firmer stance in diplomacy, diversifying trade sources, and safeguarding trade and technology. Additionally, they have launched a coordination platform to counter coercion and collaborate with emerging economies. While details regarding its implementation remain vague, it is likely that countries will support one another by increasing trade, or providing funding to circumvent any obstacles imposed by China. Furthermore, the G7 intends to strengthen supply chains for vital goods like minerals and semiconductors, and bolster digital infrastructure to prevent hacking and technology theft. Their most potent weapon, however, will be multilateral export controls. This approach entails collaborating to ensure that their technologies, particularly those used in military and intelligence, do not fall into the hands of malicious actors. The US has already implemented this strategy by imposing a ban on exports of chips and chip technology to China, with Japan and the Netherlands joining the effort. The G7 has made it clear that such endeavors will not only persist but intensify, regardless of China's objections. They also pledged to continue cracking down on the inappropriate transfers of technology shared through research activities. Concerns over industrial espionage have prompted the US and numerous other countries to prosecute individuals accused of stealing tech secrets for China. Simultaneously, the G7 leaders expressed their desire to maintain ties with China. Much of their language concerning economic coercion did not explicitly mention China, seemingly attempting to avoid directly pointing fingers at Beijing. When they did discuss China, they adopted a nuanced approach while standing their ground. They sought to appease Beijing, stating that their policies were not designed to harm China, nor do we seek to thwart China's economic progress and development. They emphasized that they were not promoting decoupling or isolationism. However, they also exerted pressure on China, urging it to cooperate and highlighting that a growing China that plays by international rules would be of global interest. They called for candid engagement, indicating their willingness to maintain open lines of communication in a tense atmosphere. The private response of Chinese leaders and diplomats to the G7's message remains unknown. In the past, Chinese state media has criticized the West for attempting to simultaneously criticize China while benefiting from their economic partnership. China had anticipated the G7 statements, as evident from the days leading up to the summit when Chinese state media and embassies published pieces accusing the US of its own economic coercion and hypocrisy. In response to the G7 statements, China lodged a complaint with summit organizer Japan, accusing the G7 of smearing and attacking China. they urged the other G7 countries not to become accomplices in economic coercion, and called for an end to the formation of exclusive blocs and containment of other countries. It is worth noting that China has also been actively seeking to form alliances with other countries. Just as the G7 summit commenced, China hosted a parallel meeting with Central Asian countries. The effectiveness of the G7's plan remains uncertain, but it is likely to be welcomed by those who have called for a clear strategy to address China's encroachments. Andrew Small, an expert on the Indo-Pacific and China, commended the statement, stating that it had the feel of a real consensus, and represented the center-ground view of the G7. However, significant debates persist regarding the meaning of de-risking, the extent of technology export restrictions, and the collective measures needed to counter economic coercion. Nonetheless, there is now a clear and explicit framework outlining the need to rebalance economic relationships with China among advanced industrial economies, as emphasized by Dr. Small, a senior transatlantic fellow with the German Marshall Fund think tank.